Good morning, everybody. I'm embarrassed to say that before Rafi got in touch, I'd not heard anything about the Fed. I won't ever forget, and it's been utterly inspirational to hear your voices, to see that video. Just what you do is amazing, and I'm utterly delighted to be here today. I'm aware that time is short, and we've got another very inspirational voice to hear. What I would like to say is I'm going to talk to Anna briefly for about 15 minutes, and then what we'd like is for you to be able to put your questions to her. So Rafi and some of the guys are going to be walking around with a microphone. So if you just put your hand up, let me know that you've got a question. If you can wait for the microphone to get to you, that would be super. I'm aware some of you might have to leave. If you do, please just head out nice and quietly, and thank you very much indeed for coming today. Anna, it's been my career to ask questions of people, and quite often when you sit down and talk to somebody, you think, what on earth am I going to ask them? How on earth am I going to sustain 20 minutes? Well, that is simply not the case here. We don't have a huge amount of time, as I say, so it's going to be a bit of a whistle stop. And I think a lot of people want to know why you joined a company straight from university and stayed, and why you've never looked elsewhere.
I think the first thing is what attracted me to Beaverbrooks in the first place, I guess, because I had finished university, I'd gone travelling around Africa for a year, and had worked here in an orphanage. I was very into charity side of things. And then I went for an interview. I'd seen a management trainee scheme at Beaverbrooks. I always knew I wanted to go into retail. I'm a people person, I'm a shopper. Didn't really know a lot about jewellery, if I'm honest. But I sat and listened to this company that was about giving 10% at that time of post-tax profits to charity every year. How every individual in the business had a voice, and actually this career progression that if you worked hard and got on. And before I had that interview, I'd been to several graduate training interview days that were so corporate and felt like such a number. I think that family feel and the values of the business are what attracted me. And then from day one, I have just loved every day. And I think those values are even stronger now than they were when I started 23 years ago. And to know, you know, for most people outside looking in, Beaverbrooks sells jewellery, but we do so much more. You know, our purpose of enriching lives is something that makes a difference every single day. And that is why I've stayed for 23 years. I love what I do, and I love the values and the ethics of the business.
You've stayed, but clearly you've not stayed in post.
No.
You've become the first non-family CEO in a family business. How daunting was that?
It was quite surreal, I think, because I have, as you said, and as the introduction was, I worked my way up through the business because at every stage I loved what I did. I never really looked too far ahead because I loved what I was doing. And the day that Mark asked me to take the role of chief exec, I think first of all, he'd known me at that point for 15 years, and never, I don't think he'd seen me lost for words. But I think it was a head and heart moment for me because at that point I'd already invested 15 years of my life. I had that sense of chief exec. I'd been head of retail 18 months, so I felt ill-prepared in some ways. But I remember asking Mark the question, if I say no, what will happen? And he told me there and then he would look externally. Well, that was almost like a dagger in my heart because I think I felt if someone else externally came into this business that didn't understand the culture fully, what would happen? So it was a little bit of a moment that my head said, can you really do this? But my heart said, you can't do anything else but do it because the business already meant so much. So I think I was completely, I think I felt very grateful, and I've loved every minute since. But it's been 8 years and I've never looked back. But it was daunting. And I think one of the questions I asked of Mark as a family business is, I want to know what your dad thinks. Mr. Gerald had been in the business, you know, he's in his 80s. And he actually said, ask him. And he said, if I was 30 years younger, Anna, I'd be in there with you. So that was just a brilliant moment.
So it's a family business, but it sounds like the business is family.
It is family. We talk about Beaverbrooks being the Beaverbrooks family, and that was a revamp out of our Beaverbrooks way, which in a lot of businesses is a mission statement, because that was feedback that we got from our people. Our culture is strong, and we have 71 stores across the UK, and we have multiple departments at the office, and everyone, we turned it around from being a great employer to being about being a great workplace, because we all have a responsibility to make it a great place to be. And I think that turned it around, and everyone says it's a family here, and I think that was even more so throughout COVID. So it really is a family, and it's a family feel across the business. And that comes from Mark and the family and the values. But I remember saying several years ago, you know, to Mark that those values live on regardless of who's running the business now, because it's so ingrained.
So you'd got a few years under your belt.
Yeah.
And then COVID.
And then COVID. Well, it was awful, really, because I think we'd just literally come out of our centenary year. So our financial year end was in February. We were looking forward to really celebrating our success. We'd really, for us at Beaverbrooks, success is twofold. It's about the financial success. We need that to invest and strengthen the business. But it's very much about that culture and the people as well. So in March, we were looking forward to getting all our managers and assistant managers from across the business together to celebrate and have a party. And literally, it was before the government announcement, there was this growing, COVID was out there, and we wanted to get a sense of, well, how are our people feeling? And I remember Simon, who's our retail director, sat here, and I said to him, I need to go out and see this for myself. And on the Saturday morning, we visited Trafford and Manchester. And our teams were amazing, but there was an increasing number of stores closing. You could see there was discomfort, people on public transport. And I remember phoning Mark that day and saying, Mark, we need to phone our stores. I said, I'll give you 10 minutes, I'll call you back. We need to shut them now, because what we didn't want to do was wait to be told, because we knew that the right thing to do was actually to keep our people and our customers safe. So I think that weekend was almost like grieving. It was bizarre that our stores were closing and there was no Beaverbrooks trading. So I think we very quickly pulled ourselves around and how do we now deal with this? Leading into COVID, we'd obviously done what most businesses had done, and we'd looked at, okay, if we are closed, how long can we afford to be closed? What are the financials? And what are the worst cases? And when we knew that we were going to be fine if we were closed for a significant period of time, we'd survive, then it came about keeping our people safe and then building back out of this.
People clearly are at the heart of the business. You've now got to deal with employees who maybe are concerned about whether or not they're going to have a job at the end of it. You've got to deal with employees trying to work in warehouses where you're having to make them feel safe and secure, and you're having to try and keep the Beaverbrooks name out there for your consumers.
Well, the first thing in terms of jobs, the first thing we put out there straight away is we had 3 priorities. The first was to keep our people and our customers safe. That was the first priority. Secondly, we were going to protect incomes and jobs as much as we possibly could. So we never promised there would be no redundancies, but we absolutely gave that confidence that it would be the last thing. And here we are 20 months on and not a single redundancy, which is something I think we're extremely proud of. And then, you know, you talk about the warehouse. We had to close our e-commerce, and that was the really gut-wrenching part, because we literally didn't trade Beaverbrooks for 19 days. But we needed to reconfigure our whole warehouse. So it was our senior management team, our directors, who did that and made sure it was safe. And we had a conversation early on. And again, it was with Simon and with Paul, who's our head of comms. And we said, if we're going to reconfigure this warehouse and we're going to bring our people back, it has to be safe enough for us to put our own kids in there almost. We need to have that confidence, because when people come back, they then come back. It's not part-time hours, or they come back fully. And that's how we approached it. And I think what we've had, because the communication's been really strong, every time Boris did an update, you know, we were trying to pick our way through that and instantly filming internally to put out to our 900 colleagues of what we would be doing as a result. So they were telling us they were getting more sense from us than they were from anybody else. And that confidence that grew during that time, you know, the mental health side of things, we made sure that people stayed connected, that we were giving as much reassurance as we could without making false promises. And I think for us, just to touch on what's happened since we've reopened fully in April, we have such a sense in the business that people feel grateful for how we were transparent, how we were honest and open and looked after people, that they were just, our store colleagues were desperate to get back to work, to be able to pay into this team effort to make the business stronger coming out of COVID. And that hasn't ceased. And we've just had, and we're having, the most remarkable year on the back of that. So I think that strong culture that we had going into it. Someone had told me in 2019, which we had this amazing year for our centenary, that we would be in an even stronger position culturally and financially coming out of a 20-month global pandemic. I think I'd have said that's just not possible. It's happened, and it's amazing.
I want to ask you about that, but before that, you spoke about mental health.
Yeah.
and clearly you were concerned about your workforce's mental health, but you're the boss, and you're going through the same thing as everybody else. You've got a family at home.
Yep.
How did you get through it?
I'm surrounded by amazing people is the first thing. There's an amazing team at Beaverbrooks. I think secondly, I did a lot of walking. I did a lot of walking. I think 2020 definitely took its toll on everybody, I think. And I started 2021 walking from Land's End to John O'Groats, just from a mindset perspective, not physically, I do mean virtually, guys. I didn't just take off. Mm-hmm. So I think you find what works for you. And I think, you know, having relatively young children does keep you some sort of balance because they don't accept anything less. I think homeschooling, I have sympathy for every parent who was subject to anything to do with homeschooling because there was a little bit of that in between everything else. But I think it's about self-awareness and knowing when you just need to step away. And I think, as I said, the people I'm surrounded in, it's not colleagues, they're like family as well. So I think everybody looks out for each other, which is fantastic.
You were talking about reopening.
Yep.
And how it's gone since. Your last set of figures were, remarkable is really the only word for it. You came off the back of a stellar year.
Yep.
Your best year in 102 years. And you then went into lockdowns, shutdowns, complete chaos, but revenues were only down 14%.
Yeah.
How?
I think there's probably a couple of areas. I think you asked the question before about how did we keep Beaverbrooks out there. It was a great opportunity for us to share more about the business rather than just about the product that we sell. We had a whole campaign that was on ITV that was called Share the Love. It talked about more about what we did with community and charity, and it was really engaging. So that was a lovely thing that just kept the awareness of Beaverbrooks up there. But I think two things have happened for us. Is firstly, our industry is definitely benefiting. I think we've seen a real shift in society of people wanting to spend a little bit more on goods. They're wanting to show appreciation for their loved ones, and selling a sentimental product in the main has definitely helped. We are definitely outperforming the market though, and I think I put that down to a number of things. I think I put it down to our continued investment both in stock and strengthening the business. We actually acquired 2 additional stores during lockdown or just after lockdown, which helped to strengthen the business. But also it's our people, and we always say, you know, you can't underestimate that impact that people will have, and there's no doubt that we're taking market share, and that's not just our people in the stores, although they are amazing. It's the quality. We recruit to values, so people who are joining us from externally who are specialists, they are coming in and they are values matched from the very, very beginning. So they're bought in and they're delivering. And we just have amazing people, and they are definitely our point of difference. So our third priority, I told you the first 2 before, the third was to really look at what does beyond COVID look like. And we knew going back 20 months that certainly within our industry and within retail, that the weak would get weaker, either through standing still, inaction, or burying heads, because let's face it, none of us knew what we were dealing with, and that we believed the strong would get stronger, but that needed a plan. So that's where the focus and commitment to investment was all the way through. So that has definitely benefited us now coming out of COVID.
As you're coming out of COVID, you're talking about the strong getting stronger, but in order to do that, you need to recruit more people.
Yes.
And we've all seen the figures, the jobs figures. I mean, the job market is incredible. The competition is incredible for people. It is an employees market.
Yes.
So how do you bring people in? What is it about Beaverbrooks that makes people go, okay, we'll look there first?
I think we have the longevity of reputation as a great employer that Mark talked about in the intro. I think that definitely helps us. I think the fact that we have that reputation is attractive, but you're right, it's harder than it's ever been. And I think with the balance now of working at home and coming into the office, I think that's a new thing that we need to navigate. And we haven't got everyone back yet. So I think we will see hybrid working patterns going forward. But I think we are in the same position as so many, but where we can't and don't compromise is our teams will tell us in the stores they would rather work overtime, be short, than take on the wrong people. So that focus on recruiting to values doesn't change. So it takes us longer to recruit. You know, when the first lockdown finished, we were inundated. You know, yeah, in 14 months that's turned on its head. The number of applicants has just it's just reduced massively. So we're finding ourselves, again, having to be quite agile, and we're looking at all different ways of recruiting. So we will be fine this Christmas, because again, in the stores, the reality is customers are spending more, but the footfall isn't always there. So our teams step up and they're brilliant, but it's going to be a challenge going forward, I'm sure.
We've heard a lot about sort of two tiers, the people that have to go out to work, retail, and people who are able to stay at home and work from home. You've talked about the fact that hybrid will continue. How do you make sure that the people that have to be in store feel as seen, cared for and loved as the people who are able to work from home?
I would argue they probably feel more loved in some ways because they're more visible. I think one of the things that we've done for our stores right throughout is we've maintained our COVID measures, because I think that really bred confidence and it made our people feel safe. So I think it's back to engagement. We regularly are doing updates, video updates, to keep people informed and up to date, regularly speaking with people, store visits when we can, and we have a great infrastructure. So every 16 to 17 stores has a regional manager, they have a recruitment and training manager, and they have a visual manager. So they have a support network. So they do feel visible, if you like, and cared for. And we make sure at the office, we introduced during COVID a no meetings hour in the middle of the day. And that was because, you know, historically, I think businesses haven't necessarily let people work from home because there's been a lack of trust in some businesses that will people really work. We found quite the opposite. We were having to tell people, you need to stop working, you need to have a break. And that productivity has been high, but it's a delicate balance because we still want people to come in. That culture and that creativity you get face to face, I think can't be matched when you're on a screen. It just can't. So we are working now to get that balance going forward.
Now, before we open it up to people to ask questions, the one thing that Beaverbrooks did throughout COVID, despite the fact that there were maybe some questions at some points about how much revenue you would have coming in and the extra money you were having to put in for COVID security measures, you still kept up with the charitable giving. Why?
That was more important than ever. I think to stay true to your values and your core when times are good is very easy, but actually those charities needed us more than ever during COVID. So that was the time to step it up, not step it back. And I think what we started to do was we started to meet as trustees, myself and Mark and Susie and Paul. We were meeting every fortnight on Teams calls, and we were being more inundated for requests than ever. And I think that is who we are. So we were absolutely going to keep that going. That was one of our priorities during COVID, because our people and our customers and keeping people safe, but actually the wider communities needed us more than ever. So it was absolutely critical.
You were true to yourself and to Beaverbrooks. There's a lot of talk at the moment about ESG. It's a buzzword, you know, environmental social governance.
Yeah.
And it has become fashionable for companies to exhibit some kind of credential, whether it be, you know, hey, look at me, I am jumping on the Black Lives Matter campaign, or look at me, I'm focusing on net zero. How do we know? Do you think that the consumer is smart enough to realise when those companies are doing it right for the right reasons, and when they're doing it wrong or just making a statement and not following it through? I
think consumers are becoming more and more savvy, and I think for us, because it's something we've always done, it is our DNA. I used to have this thing personally that you'd hear CSR, someone would want to talk to you about CSR, and I'd be like, oh, because we do what we do because it's just in our DNA. But I remember having a conversation with Mark, and I just got over myself, because the reality is if businesses are doing good, they're doing good. It doesn't matter what the motivation is. But your point on the black square, you know, during that time, our marketing team came to me and said, we want to put a black square on our social media, and instantly my gut feeling was, this is not us. So again, it was that thought process about what do we do instead, and we had this conversation about everything we do is genuine, it's authentic, it makes a real difference, and it's sustainable. So what is putting a black square up there really going to deliver? And out of that discussion, we created a whole diversity strategy group. We've made real changes. So I think it's that you have to step back before you can step forward, and environment is huge at the moment, and there's plenty more we can do about that. But certainly over the last decade, as an example, we've halved our energy consumption, and yet we don't talk about that. So I think as long as businesses are doing good things, I think if it is just a one-off or if it is to grab a headline, I think consumers are increasingly becoming savvy. And they vote with their feet ultimately, don't they? So I think we've been doing what we've been doing. Certainly, you know, we introduced the first Beaverbrooks Way mission statement back in the early mid-90s. So it's inherent in what we do, and actually it's in the ethos and the foundations of the business. So, you know, I think consumers see that, and our centenary was a great opportunity to shout about that.
Not just talking the talk, walking the walk, like everybody in this room, but right now it is about talking, and we would very much like to open it up. If any of you have any questions for Anna, please raise your hands and I will send the microphone over to you. I've got plenty to ask in terms of inflation and supply chains and all of those business things which anyone running a business at the moment can completely understand, but many of you will have other things that you would like to ask. So we've got one down the front here. If you do have a question, if we can just wait until the microphone gets to you, that will be great. And if we start with this lady down the front.
Hello, thanks Anna. I'm Jo Wolby. I'm from Mustard Tree, which is a charity in Greater Manchester. Thank you for that. It was really inspirational as a fellow lady, both of you, so thank you for that. I just wanted to ask you about the location of your HQ and whether you think there's any disadvantage about being based in the north. I'm saying that as a proud northerner, but I just wondered if you'd thought about that. And then secondly, what secrets you have about working with Mark Addleston?
Feed him lots of chocolate. In terms of being based in the north, I've only ever known Beaverbrooks as a northern company. I think rather than being northern, you know, it is our heartland, it's where our strength is. I think breaking into the south was quite challenging, which we definitely have done. In terms of by the seaside in St Anne's is probably more challenging from a recruitment point of view, but I think we've definitely become more flexible with that over years. And I think where maybe it's been more challenging for us is maybe some of the brand partnerships that we have with some of the Swiss watch brands, the suppliers. But the reality is London is 2 hours on the train from Preston, and we maybe have to make sure we're available more regularly, but we make it work. And I think the plus side of being there and the environment that we're investing in the office significantly, but to be in that location works for us. It's all we've ever known, and we've adapted, I guess. In terms of working with Mark, what can I say? He's wonderful to work with. I think, you know, we've worked very, very closely together for 8 years, but known each other. There's a few sniggers, Mark. We've known each other for 23 years, but I do have to share the first time I met Mark, I started with the business in the Trafford Centre, as you know, as part of the sales team. And the first time I met Mark, he knew who I was. He asked me what I wanted out of my time with Beaverbrooks. And I remember him saying, if you work hard and do a good job, you'll have a great career here. I don't think that he thought that 15 years later he'd be asking me to run the business. So I think we have a great relationship. And yeah, he's just great to work with.
Gentleman over there.
Good morning, everyone, and Anna, thank you very much for such an inspiring overview of your career. Congratulations. And obviously, thanks to Rafi and Mark for such an amazing morning as well. So my name's Tom. I'm the head of Foundation 92. So we've done some fantastic work over the past few months with the Fed around promoting equality, diversity and inclusion. Throughout your speech this morning, you've spoken quite a lot around values.
Yes.
Now, as an individual who's led a charity who's previously been supported by Beaverbrooks, you know, I fully echo those values around family and local investment and focus around local need. I'm keen to develop a greater understanding, if at all possible, around Beaverbrooks' value around how it potentially looks to invest in equality, diversity, inclusion, both within the business, but also through the Beaverbrooks Charitable Trust.
Fantastic question. Okay, so I think historically it's a great question, because I think the killing of George Floyd really kicked this off for us, because I think our culture is all about individual, you know, as I said to you, Mark talked about meritocracy as soon as I met him, and we have this broad value base that means we treat everyone as an individual. So we haven't historically had specific diversity policies, procedures, because I think a little bit of naivety there as well, that we covered everything because of the way our culture was. So I think when we started to have these conversations back in May 2020, it was very much about, right, we tackled mental health previously because we'd talked about there is a real need for this in our business to support our people. What does mental health support look like at Beaverbrooks? Beaverbrooks. So we created a statement around mental health and what that meant and how we could help our people to help themselves but also be there for them. So we approached the diversity aspect very similarly, because you start, and I've spoken to so many businesses, that you start looking at diversity and inclusion, it's like, where do you start? Because it's such a broad brush and affects so many different areas. So we started to look at what is diversity and inclusion within Beaverbrooks. Where do we start? And we've held a series of meetings and events with all of our management teams to really start. I held a series of focus groups initially to find out, first of all, what life was like at Beaverbrooks for a number of our diverse colleagues, and actually what they wanted to see happen. Because it was that premise again of stepping back to look at what do we need to do in order to be able to move forward. We've done lots of things over the years that would tick boxes in lots of business around the diversity side, but actually to make it a really inclusive workforce, and that we see our role as an employer to support and educate our people to be able to really, really push that. I think the more understanding education and inclusion focus there is, then actually the more tolerance and the more understanding. So I think we're quite early on in that journey, if I'm honest, but it is really making headway, and I think the feedback that we're getting so far is that, you know, it's the right thing because it's sustainable. We're not doing anything short term, so there will be investment. What that exactly looks like at this stage, we are working with our people to create that. So in all areas really.
Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately we are short on time, so thank you so much for coming out today. I know that Rafi would like to just jump up and say a few words. From my point of view, the one thing I did just want to mention is we've got an incredible lady here, but for me, it was just so refreshing and nice. Not the first question that I wanted to ask was, how do you do it as a woman, being a female boss? And the fact that Beaverbrooks is so inclusive and diverse and thinking about equality and putting the person first has just been great. So thank you so much indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, Anna Blackburn.
Thank you. Thank you.